the ISPAR conference this year. I'm Dr. Iain Fletcher, and I'll be chairing this session. So we've got a very short 5-minute presentation to introduce, and then we'll be straight in with our first speaker. So I'm just going to share screen with you guys. Right, so hopefully you can see all that and you can hear that. So this is going to be all about getting back on track and really looking at what is sport going to look like when we're actually back. What's the new normal going to be about? So I've got a number of speakers that are going to be talking about their experiences over the summer and what their plans are for the future. Now, ISPAR is made up of 3 centres. We've got a centre for physical education, sport and human movement, a centre for health, wellbeing and behaviour change, and the centre that's presenting this particular day, which is the Centre for Physical Activity and Sports Performance. Each of those centres have a slightly different interest group. So physical education, sport and human movement is more around pedagogy and education. Health, wellbeing, behaviour change, much more around normal populations and ill populations. And then physical activity, sports performance, a lot more around sports performance, biomechanics, nutrition and metabolism. So this is what our centre is really about. We're interested in sports performance. When I mean performance, that could be squaddies, that could be firemen, that could be policemen. So it's a broad church. We're interested in the biomechanics behind performance. So what makes somebody run faster, jump higher, last longer? We're interested in about physical activity, how to increase physical activity in normal populations. And we're interested in nutrition and metabolism and how we can manipulate that for a healthier workforce, a healthier, fitter sports performer, etc. Okay, so hopefully you've already had 2 days that some of you might have been zooming in with us. Don't worry if you've missed the first and second day. It's not a problem. Everything is going to be recorded on YouTube, so you can play this back for this day or play back the other 2 days if there's anything in there that you think could be of interest to you. And you'll be given details on how to get hold of those that YouTube site at the end of this program. So for today, this is what we're doing. Quick welcome by me. So we'll sort of finish that pretty quickly because you want to actually listen to the experts. We're going to have Richard Sackey-Addo, who's working in tennis, in the tennis integrity unit. So he's going to be the first keynote. We're then going to have a recording from Paddy Hogben, who's working in Australia. And strangely, he didn't want to get up at 12 at night to do a recording for us. So I'm not quite sure why that is, but he sent a recording over, so I'll be playing that. We've then got Tom Bromley, who will be looking at professional football and how COVID has impacted on there. We'll have some questions, a quick break, and then we're into the second half where we'll look at returning to rugby with Chris Long, returning to golf with Jack Wells. Mick Dwyer will be looking at professional rugby, so a slightly higher level than Chris was. And then we've got Kevin Paxton, who's been looking at professional football with Leicester City. And again, we'll have some questions at the end if you do find any of this interesting for you. Need a big thank you for the people that help fund this. So these are the people that sponsor ISPAR in sport, in business, in medicine. And that really is how we function. So a big thank you to them. And also a big thank you to some of the people that have made this possible. A long list of staff that have helped with ISPAR and helped with the conference, and a long list of students that have helped with this conference as well. Right, so that's just a quick introduction to ISPAR. I'm now, gives me great pleasure to welcome Richard Sackey-Addo. Now, Richard did a degree and a master's with us a few years ago. He's now working in tennis in the tennis integrity unit. So basically, he runs the education program about betting, about anti-doping for professional tennis. So without too much ado, I'm going to pass you over to Richard for his presentation. So Richard, if you want to share screen, then you're going to be in charge.
Thank you very much. Just making sure everyone can see my screen there. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so thank you very much, Iain. So as Iain said, my name is Richard Sackey-Addo. I'm a UOB graduate. I did a sport exercise science degree followed by a sports performance master's, and finished my master's 5 years ago. So I'm now currently the education coordinator, working in the education and training team for the tennis integrity unit. So yeah, very, very thankful for the opportunity today. Just like to quickly mention that even though it's been 5 years since I left uni, we were given a deadline of 5 p.m. yesterday to give our presentations to Iain, and I gave mine in at 4:53. So clearly some things never change from being a student. So just like to start with a little bit of background about the presentation today. So just taking you through, how the COVID-19 pandemic and the suspension of professional tennis has affected what we do at the Tennis Integrity Unit, and how we've had to adapt our education program to protect all of our stakeholders within the professional tennis landscape. So just a bit of background here on this slide, for those of you unfamiliar with how the Tennis Integrity Unit fits into the professional tennis governance structure. So we are the unit responsible for safeguarding the integrity of tennis. So we currently deal with all betting related corruption and dealing with enforcing the tennis anti-corruption program rules. Next year, we're going through a bit of a period of transition at the moment. From next year, the tennis anti-doping program will fall under our remit as well. So sort of some of what I'll talk about through today's presentation has been in preparation for when anti-doping comes across to us next year as well. So we were formed in 2008 by all of the international governing bodies of professional tennis that you can see on your screen there. So that's the ATP, WTA, ITF, and the 4 Grand Slam tournaments. They fund us and we're governed by them. And we were actually one of the first dedicated integrity units in sport that was set up. So of course now many other sports since then have followed suit and set up their own specific integrity units and integrity departments that deal with betting related corruption and other elements of integrity. So in terms of the tennis betting landscape, some of you may or may not be surprised to know that tennis is actually the 3rd most bet on sport in the world. And we're behind only horse racing and football for the amount of money that the tennis betting market generates. So some of you may think, oh, I didn't think tennis would be up there. It's not as popular as some other sports maybe, but there's a number of reasons for why tennis is so popular and attractive to gamblers. So part of that being our lovely scoring system, which allows and facilitates so many different in-play markets. So betting, there are betting markets from, who's going to have the next double fault, the next point, who's going to win the game, how many sets. There are many different contingencies within a match that can be bet on. And what we see every year is the tennis betting industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And right the way from individual matches at the lowest levels at the ITF level, which is kind of the entry level of professional tennis, we see, week in, week out for these entry level matches, tens of thousands of dollars being placed on individual matches. There may be no one watching these matches live in person, but they still attract a lot of attention from the betting industry. And then also right the way up to Grand Slam level to, some of the biggest matches in the sport, we see, regularly individual matches attracting millions of dollars worth of bets. So with all this money that the sport attracts from betting and gambling, lots of it regulated and completely legal, it also, this amount of money attracts criminality and corruption, and people who try and corrupt players and other people in our sport to do things to manipulate matches, manipulate tournaments, and so on and so forth. So those are some of the challenges that we regularly face, which has only been sort of increased and become more challenging during the time of the suspension of professional tennis because of COVID-19. So to start off with, I'll just go through with a bit of a definition of what we like to think of integrity as being about. So this is a message that we give through to players who are educating them and other covered persons. So we like to think of integrity as doing the right thing even when no one is watching. So what underpins that is, of course, it's fundamental and it's essential for everyone to know the rules, to know what they can and can't do, particularly for our players. But also what's important and supplements that is we like to think and try and get across in our education good values and good decision-making skills that underpin what everyone should know about the rules. So of course, as part of that, the values that we try to get across are, particularly in those most vulnerable of situations, in those most difficult times, are being able to, particularly for our players, tennis being a sport where players are traveling largely on their own week to week, from city to city, from country to country, with no coaching set up or anyone else around them, is when you're in those most difficult situations, having good values that underpin those good decisions that you're going to consistently make and consistently making the right choices. Often the right choice is the harder choice to make compared to doing the wrong thing. But, we try and get this across in our message to players particularly, and all covered persons when we're educating. And also what's important with that is if people are ever unsure or players are ever unsure, knowing who to ask, how to ask, and where to do this and where to find information, which is a big part of our education program, is making all of our information as accessible as possible for a global remit, as we are responsible for professional tennis for the whole world. So suspension of professional tennis, as with all sports, this has been during the pandemic, a really challenging and difficult year. So we've seen right from the middle of March this year to throughout August, all professional events were suspended. So that's from Grand Slam level events. So you may have seen in the news, the French Open was rescheduled, was meant to be in May, it's now happening in a couple of weeks. I'm sure there's largely a British contingent in attendance today. So, we're normally used to seeing Wimbledon during the summer, but for the first time since the war, there was no Wimbledon because of the pandemic. And of course, suspensions at the men's tour, women's tour, and developmental ITF level as well. So, it's one of the first times it's ever happened in the sport. So, some of the risks that came with the suspension, or that we saw in anticipation of it, we did see an increase or a spike in activity from our partners in the betting industry. So we received more match alerts from the betting industry that there may have been suspicious betting patterns on certain matches and certain tournaments. And also we received more reports from players who were receiving corrupt approaches from corruptors, asking them to manipulate certain parts of their matches or to lose particular entire matches on purpose. So we anticipated that due to the fact that, the criminals and corruptors were also realizing that, there's going to be less amount of tennis matches being played, or, as what happened eventually, that the tour was completely suspended. So we had to act quickly as a sport to conduct, comprehensive integrity risk assessment, see what the risks were from an anti-corruption point of view and an anti-doping point of view. And we had to work across all of the international governing bodies I mentioned at the start for what our response was going to be and how best we were going to protect our sport and our stakeholders within the sport. So that required really strong collaboration from everyone. For those of you that may or not know, tennis has a bit of a complicated governance structure that we essentially have 7 governing bodies. So, making sure that everyone was singing off the same song sheet and, really buying into what we were trying to do was really imperative to that. So some of the integrity challenges that we faced, we'll see on this slide. So it was really imperative for us to protect all of our stakeholders, the players, the coaches, the officials, the tournament staff, the agents, everyone involved in professional tennis during this time where increased risks of below were prevalent. So due to the lack of playing opportunities or sanctioned playing opportunities, there were obviously financial implications, not just for players, but everyone involved in the game. So tennis is not like other sports where they don't receive a wage or a salary. They make their livelihoods where they have to play and they earn prize money. So if they don't play or if they're losing matches, then they don't earn. So of course, the financial implications is an increased risk for, for someone to send a player a DM or a message saying, hey, when the tour comes back, how do you fancy just losing a set and we'll pay you X amount? That all of a sudden becomes a lot more attractive to do that. And so we had to protect and make sure players were aware that that was a very real risk that could happen to them. The nature of unsanctioned events and the jurisdiction of our rules. So whilst we welcomed all the opportunities for players to play in exhibition matches or privately organised tournaments, for those of you in the UK, you would have seen the Battle of the Brits, for example, at the National Tennis Centre, which is run by the LTA. So it was really good to have players be able to compete and play, before going back to the regular tour internationally, but making sure that everyone was aware that our rules still had jurisdiction and that everyone who's covered by our rules normally still had to follow the tennis anti-corruption programme rules and the tennis anti-doping programme rules, even though the events that they were playing in weren't formally sanctioned by the governing bodies. Detection, so detection from, as I mentioned, match alerts from the betting industry. We were still working and receiving match alerts and information from our partners in the betting industry, and in some cases law enforcement as well surrounding corruption, and also anti-doping, making sure that throughout this time, the betting industry still had to operate, and there were markets offered on these matches that were not fully sanctioned matches. So, in terms of prize money and other sponsorship opportunities, making sure players are aware that, okay, these events happen outside of our rules, but you still can't be paid or receive your prize money from a betting company. You still can't play in a tournament that's, sponsored by a betting company. You can't put a tweet out or wear some apparel that has a betting logo. They still have to follow those rules. And lastly, there are education delivery. Normally, our education program is primarily about our face-to-face interaction and engagement at tournaments, particularly the larger tournaments, where there's many hundreds of players, officials, coaches in attendance. But now, we didn't have that, and we had to switch everything to being online, as I'm sure most of you have had to do in your industries as well. So how did we innovate? So again, we had to act really quickly to educate as many of our stakeholders globally during this time. And we really had to focus on supporting everyone in the sport to really continue making smart and informed decisions. And like I said, the whole values piece from the beginning, still abiding by those values of fair play and, not breaking the rules. And even though there are increased risks during this time. Making sure that we publish guidance and information early across the sport. So as I mentioned earlier, communication, working across the sport and across many different organizations, making sure that a clear, consistent message was given out to the sport, and by our traditional face-to-face sessions being replaced by Zoom webinars. So, we really had to, as a team, our education team was a team of 3, we had to get up to speed with how Zoom works, all the functionalities, and to make the most of that to be able to deliver the most engaging sessions that we could do possible. And again, those last 2 points there, again, it was something we're very proud of, how well we worked across all the international governing bodies, coaching organizations, national associations. All those strong partnerships, as you all know, within sport are really key. That really helped facilitate our success during this time. So what did we achieve during this time? This is a slide myself and my colleagues are very proud about. As I mentioned, we're only a team of 3 and we have a global remit. So during the 5 months of tour suspension, we were able to educate over 1,400 individuals. And that spanned professional players, coaches, officials, agents, tournament staff. And that was across 62 different education sessions that we all personally delivered. And again, the global remit of our work, we made sure to I feel like I'm doing a bit of a sales pitch for Zoom here, but to fully utilize the simultaneous interpretation function to deliver across 5 different major languages to make sure we covered as many different people across the world as possible. In terms of players, we had players ranked from the #1 player in the world in their discipline, right the way down to someone who was 1,706, so a junior who's starting to play professional events. And that was, again, for all player groups across all divisions. So through wheelchair and quad divisions, men's players, women, and of course, juniors as well. In terms of the officials and coaches that we were able to educate, we educated the highest level of officials and coaches within our sport, and who are regularly on tour and at the biggest events, but also those who may not be on the international tours, but are working nationally at domestic level, making sure that everyone had the opportunity to access our webinars and other information that we are providing. Our webinars also targeted agents, and we were lucky enough that lots of the agents were agents of top 100 players. So players right at the top end of the game. So for those of you who work in sport already know it's not always easy to get through to athletes, or athletes may not always attend things that they think aren't important to them. So it was really key for us to target agents as well, to pass on the messages and the education that we were delivering, which was really good. And again, those partnerships across the sport helped us facilitate that. And that last point there, I just realized that reads, we didn't do 19-hour sessions from 7 a.m. to 2 a.m. non-stop, but we really had to be flexible and work across different time zones to suit our sport and everyone involved that we were targeting. So our first session ranged from delivering a webinar right from 7 a.m. in the morning to, on occasion, there was the odd 2 a.m. at night that we had to deliver, again, to make sure that we covered everyone across the globe and across all continents. And lastly, what have we learned from this time? As I'm sure with all of you, we've learned a tremendous amount about how we work as a team, our organisation, and what we can do better to improve in future as a result of this. But we've fundamentally had to adapt how we work. So getting used to working remotely from each other, and getting used to working with different platforms and different technologies and with different people. And we've had to be really creative with our delivery and our engagement over the different platforms. So particularly making sure the information that we're delivering from a corruption and doping standpoint, what we're delivering to players and how we're delivering to players is going to be different to how we deliver to coaches and officials or staff, for example. So making sure each session that we delivered right across all those 62 is specific and targeted and delivered in a way that is best received by that target group. As I mentioned before, prior to tour suspension, a lot of our education was based on face-to-face interaction. We do have mandatory online modules that all players and officials and lots of other people in the sport have to do to be able to work or play in the sport professionally. But this is a time where we realized, now we're comfortable using Zoom, and webinars are just kind of an accepted part of society now almost, that we're going to continue using the technology that we've all gotten so used to using, and to have more of an emphasis on a blended learning approach by supplementing what we can do face-to-face, which is fantastic and we would always prioritize, but also supplementing this with other online mediums and platforms. A regional delivery model for us was very important, as particularly for some of the smaller continents that we're responsible for. Sometimes it can be easy to not get as much information out or to not see them as a priority, but we definitely viewed every continent across the world that we're responsible for as being important. So we made sure to give everyone consistent messaging and the same amount of messaging to make sure everyone is as covered as possible. I've mentioned a few times before throughout the presentation about how important our strong partnerships across the sport were. Anyone in sport knows, it's really key to have a really good multidisciplinary approach or to work well with other partnerships and organizations. And that's something that we did and really helped us facilitate this project. And we're really proud of that. And again, are going to continue improving those relationships going into the future. And lastly, there for us as a team, we always strive to improve our practices and approaches, but this time has kind of forced everyone to to adapt and to change what they do and to work differently. So we're definitely going to continue that. And we've had to, and are glad we've got comfortable being uncomfortable with all the circumstances that have been given to us during this time. So that brings to a close my presentation. There's just some contact details if you would like to contact me, or if you'd like to know a little bit more about what we do at the Tennis Integrity Unit. There's details for our website there, and also for how to download our free app. So once again, I'd just like to thank everyone at UOB for this opportunity. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and looking forward to the rest of the session. So thanks very much. There's no questions there that I can see. So again, please use the chat, or feel free to email me later.
Thank you very much, Richard. Really enjoyed that. It's interesting for me, as somebody that's a strength and conditioner who works in sports science in sport. We all think it's about strength and conditioning, coaching, etc., etc. I think sometimes we lose that everything else that goes around in professional sport. So for me, that was really insightful in terms of all of the background information that is going on in what's a really complex area.
Just quickly to that, Ian, that is, integrity is sort of a newer area of sport that people are still getting used to. But again, for all the training and things we do with our athletes, if they're just going to go out onto the field of play and lose on purpose, or they've taken a bribe, it's all for nothing. So it's a really important aspect to have in performance sport as well.
Exactly. No, so thank you very much. Yeah, fascinating for me. We're going to go on to our second speaker, but before I do that, I forgot to tell all the participants, if you want to ask some questions, just use the chat function, and we'll answer most of your questions through that, if that's okay for you. Right, so our second speaker is Paddy Hogben. Now, Paddy did a master's at University of Bedfordshire a few years ago. He's been strength and conditioner at Saracens, Bedford Blues. He then went to America, and he was a strength and conditioner over in the States. And now he's moved to Australia, where he's looking after the Geelong Cats. And that's an Australian football league, so Aussie rules. Now, he can't be with us, so he's sent a video. So hopefully this will work, but somebody do shout out if you can't hear or see the video that I'm going to play you. So let's see how this goes.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Paddy Hogben. I'm the Rehabilitation and Conditioning Coach at Geelong Football Club. Apologies I can't be with you in person today. I'm currently in a performance hub in Queensland, so I've had to send this recorded version of my presentation. Over the course of the next 15 minutes, I'm going to talk to you on the return to sport in professional Australian rules football. I'm going to try and give you an insight into the process our performance team went through planning the return to competition.
Right. Well, I'd like to say thank you to Paddy anyway. I think for a lot of us, his insight in the potential injury risk and injury rise in sport when we do come back from COVID could be really important. Whether your players are going to have a short amount of time to prepare and then a really congested season that's going to cause injuries, or if your players have done nothing for 6 months and are going to come back in a terrible shape and again cause injuries, I think could be really important to all of us. Right, I'm going to now pass you over to Tom Bromley. Now, Tom did a degree with the University of Bedfordshire quite a few years ago now. I'm not aging you too quickly, Tom. And then did a master's at
Middlesex
University. He's the lead strength and conditioner at MK Dons, and he's been working there for the last 8 years. So I'll pass you over to Tom, and we'll go from there.
Right, wicked. Hope everyone can see that and everyone can hear me.
Yep.
If not, just mention in the chat. If not, so thanks, Ian. Obviously, really grateful to be invited here to present a couple of our findings and a bit more of a broader review of what happened in the summer and how we are now. Like I said, I'm UOB graduate, master's from Middlesex, trying to use as much of that information as I can into day-to-day practice. I work with a fantastic team here, the 4 of us, a couple of physios and a fitness coach. I'm more of the gym side of it. So hopefully most of your questions, if any, are more gym-based towards me. Let's get cracking then, shall we? So a presentation overview, like I said, it's going to be a little bit broader. It's mainly to do with the life in lockdown, more of a timeline of events from present to how we were back then and what hopefully we want to become. An overview of the off-season and a phased return to this unpredicted time away in football. So we're going to go over the abrupt end of the 1920 campaign, question marks over short-term and long-term preparation, the evidential delays, which I'm sure everyone knows, overcoming remote access, and then once we're finally back, tempering our expectations on the return to pre-season and our outlook and planning going forward. So I don't know if anyone knew this, I found this out the other day actually. It's actually Friday the 13th that it all started kicking off for us. We had preparations for Oxford United away. We're 3/4 of the way through the season, doing well. We changed the manager at the time, got a really nice group of guys here, doing quite nicely. And then, as you all know, lockdown occurred for us. We were locked out. We couldn't finish the remaining part of the season as far as we knew. We were in our final macro for us as strength conditioning coaches, fitness coaches. It killed us really because it's our end of season testing, so we couldn't review anything and we couldn't look at our more of a season review and plan for the off season going forwards. Like I said, there was a lockdown at this point. We weren't allowed to come back in. It was a Friday. It was a ghost town. We still had coffee mugs on the tables here back in the offices. Then there's reports out there, the potential multiple outcomes that we had to prepare for. There was going to be a vote on League One, whether to continue the season as it was after a couple of weeks away, completely finish the season, or just use the playoff teams could come back and contend to either promotion or relegation. So again, for us, we're stuck in limbo a little bit if we were to push or pull. We had to give out weekly maintenance programs, and every week we found out a new bit of information as the COVID cases did rise. Finally, we found out that the vote meant the season was finished early, other than the playoff teams, which we weren't in. So we had a clear understanding of our off-season and preparation for our pre-season going forwards. Typically for us, this is more for the strength side, we look for a 1 week deload and active rest at the end of the season, depending on match minutes accumulated throughout the season. We then look at more traditional periodization, 4 to 5 weeks aggressive loading on our main core lifts that we use. Try and get as much contact time as possible, either that's in here or at remote locations or even online. And then after that, we asked the lads to pop down a week in early before the start of pre-season, just for a checkup, to submax test their strength and power to make sure they have been following the programs correctly. And then we can base those assessments on our pre-season planning and also the individual accessory lifts should they need any. However, this wasn't the case, as I'm sure everyone knows. There was a large time off in our off season. We couldn't prepare like we would do usually, so we all saw it as an opportunity to use it as a bit of a case study for us. And in any case study, we've got to look at our needs analysis. What can we learn from how this ever happened beforehand? What's happening around us? Can we find any bit of useful information we can then use to integrate into our performance? So we found there were 2 significant pieces we could draw from. One of them, like was mentioned previously, was the NFL lockout in 2011 over pay, which was 20-week lockout. And they found up to a significant rise in Achilles tendon ruptures, up to 5 times. And also, as you guys are aware, everyone's had a German football team for the last couple of months when there was no football on. The Bundesliga did return before us, and they saw a significant rise in injuries as well, soft tissue injuries, from 0.27 to 0.88 per game. Just something to bear in mind. Another factor is detraining. We predicted over 130 days out, where there were limited facilities for the boys to use. They couldn't go to a gym, which they would do usually. There was all of the online equipment at this point were completely sold out, which was very frustrating for us. So how can we get around it? And what do we know about detraining and knowing that this is the position they're going to be in for the next however long? So we know it's been reported, just using a couple of these studies. You guys are more than welcome to look at these. I try to keep it as clear as I can. I'm just going to breeze over them. Report that strength and power can be maintained for up to 3 weeks. Happy days. But then after that, exponential decreases up to 15% from the following weeks and months after. Found a decrease in up to 10% in lean muscle mass as well. And finally, significant decrease in eccentric strength, alluding back to Paddy's presentation about hamstring injuries in football, team sports particularly. In football, it's a very run and high-speed dominant sport, so it's a big red flag for us. And then moving on, we're looking at neuromuscular performance. So maintenance of plyometrics to overcome this potentially. And because of neuromuscular decrements, it can impair the stretch shortening cycle as well as collagen synthesis. And this may be linked perhaps to this NFL lockdown, where they reported quite a few Achilles tendon ruptures. Could be perhaps linked. How can then we use that information and just delay it as long as we possibly can before they can get reloaded again? So firstly is a dose response. We know training volume typically produces a dose response on muscle growth. And with progressive overload, it's been reported that you can maintain and even increase lean muscle size through hypertrophy, as I'm sure most people know. High volume circuit training, again, this is perfect for us, because imagine a scenario where you're just at home, you've got no equipment available to you, and these are professional athletes. What can we do to cling on as much as we can to their strength during these times? Again, for plyometrics, as we've spoken about, to protect these tendons and protect any neuromuscular changes. And then finally, isometrics. Us in Dons, we're big believers in isometrics. We try and use them as much as we possibly can, particularly for rehab and also for in-season, for pre-training. It's obviously perfect for the lads to use initially for the first phase, where they don't have to use equipment. We can just manipulate the sets and reps and duration. Particularly if you'd like to look further onto this, we kind of base our theory on this Alex Natera, his 4-stage continuum, which I'm happy to go through at a later date with you guys if anyone wants to email me about that. Coping competitively. So over this 4-month period, we looked at various different methods and different modalities how to maintain adherence. As most of you, I'd imagine, have seen, physical challenges been popping up left, right, centre online and on social media. It's great for us as strength and conditioning coaches to put the ownership back on the players and to make them competitive again, because at the end of the day, that's all they want to do is beat the man next to them. So we use plenty of physical challenge, such as the Ross Barkley 5K. Unfortunately, we did have a staff team in that as well. I'm not going to say how it went. We use Strava leaderboards. And like I said before, we try to post as much information up on social media as they can so they can look at themselves on there and hopefully keep that adherence into their training programs. We use another variety of third-party apps, one being MyFitnessPal. Originally, we set this up just to monitor eating habits for them once we gave them a couple of ideas. However, it did blossom into a bit of an educational tool, which we are still currently using with 1 or 2 players. We use a huddle analysis for tactical analysis and also Zoom to make sure we've got as much contact time as possible with the guys. And this has all been collated on our benchmark system where we can monitor their training load, their gym load, training load. They would also give their wellness on that so we can monitor remotely whether we need to, again, push or pull any certain individuals. Windows of opportunity. We did, when we were brainstorming, we did have a think about this, and although lockdown at home isolation was all doom and gloom, can lead to a couple of positive effects with the players and their footballing career and potential life lessons, like we said with the MyFitnessPal. We've seen that in complete rest, it's very few situations where you're in a team sport that you get an opportunity for an extended period off. Therefore, we use this as a complete rest situation where those with short-term injuries and niggles, which players don't usually say to us, which they are underlining and carrying, they can just completely deload and get back to square one. They don't need to worry about the stresses of having to play through anything, potentially leading to any nasty injuries down the line. Again, like we said, educational lifestyle. We work closely with SIS, the sports nutrition company. We use their experts in season for educational for the first team and academy. And they put together a variety of webinars, which we invited the boys to attend to. And they go from everything from general lifestyle and health and well-being to match day and training day nutrition, and also sleep and performance. And finally, the last couple of points, extensive prehab. Like we said before, you rarely get enough time to go through any of these little niggling issues in season, especially at the back end of the season. So we use this extensive period where you don't need to use many weights, you don't need to use a big activity in a big space to just iron out these correctives that we've identified through the season. And also it's a nice slow reaccumulation of their chronic load, because typically from off-season to pre-season, if you do have a new coach, new fitness coach, ideas they want to throw in, and it ends up being, let's get as much done as we possibly can in pre-season. So it's a nice gradual increase in their chronic load going throughout. Another method to delay the consequence of detraining would be eating well. We found evidence, obviously working with SIS as well has helped us greatly along this, is if we do program the boys and try and force feed them into eating as much as they possibly can, particularly 1.5 to 2 grams per kilo body weight of protein, and eating as much carbs as they can on the particular training days, it does sustain lean muscle mass. So this is a sort of an example program which we'd give them all. We're putting them all on one sheet. We're giving them a little bit more information as well after this. They'll try and follow these as targets for their rest day training day. We use MyFitnessPal to extrapolate all that data from it, and then put the ownership back on them by displaying all of their targets and what their actual weekly averages are. Hopefully dig a few of them out, and then they'll learn the hard way. So moving on to the rebuild, the start of the rebuild back to pre-season didn't go according to plan. Following this 30-page document with strict rules and regulations. It was split into 3 stages, each one more lenient to the next. When we came back to training, we were allowed to use the grass in small bubbles, in small groups. However, when the first stage protocol came across, gyms should remain closed and out of action. Unfortunately for us, we had to issue another week maintenance program away from the Lodum. After that one was all checked off and cleared, the following week, and stage 2 protocol came out, we could then start kicking on. We could start using outdoor facilities and gazebo style shelters. And we made the most of this. Who knew these beer tents can be so handy, eh? Moving on to the last couple of slides. As a season opportunity of sessions, we only managed to cover 3 times less than what we anticipated to do, and a lot less than what it was in previous pre-seasons and off-seasons. So already we're on the back foot in terms of strength training. So we then utilise this minimal effective training dose, like Paddy mentioned previously, and also microdosing every single day, starting from Monday. In fact, we're going to ask the guys pre-training to just make sure they're on top of not only their correctives pre-training, which they'll do anyway, but also microdosing the isometric circuits, bodyweight circuits, as much as we possibly can do to keep them fresh for the games as the season starts creeping in, and also maintain that strength level and slowly build on it. So this was highlighted. Currently, this is where we sit in our annual periodisation. We're just here right on the top left-hand corner, playing Doncaster tomorrow. Once the squads are established, we look to split them into 3 different groups. You're starting 11 groups, more squad players groups where you dip in and out, and the development players. Each one has specific targets and goals based on their match minutes, any reserve match that pop up, and also any opportunities that we have, any lower body sessions that we're able to take. As you can see, it does become very congested as we are now, and with this limited training opportunity beforehand, we've got to then try and get the boys back up to speed where they are in between playing these match minutes. Unfortunately, like we said, we haven't managed to assess them, submax assess them until now. So they are all back into their general prep phase, even though we're season. Coming forwards, we can get the boys back on scratch. So thank you for listening, guys. Again, it's a bit more of a broader approach. Any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Any specific questions on anything or any of the research, feel free to email me, my work email there, or follow me on Twitter, and then we can start a conversation online. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. Yeah, really interesting. Really well put together in terms of, you've got a lot of research in there as well, which is nice to see. I'm going to ask a couple of questions because I don't think that through the chat there's been too many, but
yeah, there's been 1 or 2.
I wanted to ask you something. I'm going to look at this as a positive. A few of the speakers have been talking about education of players. Do you think in the future what you've managed to do now will actually make your job easier and make them better players, because you're actually putting more emphasis on educating them, on them actually taking some ownership of their training?
Yeah, you're exactly right. It does make us does make it a bit easier to convince them to do the things that we're asking them to do, because now they've had the time to read about it themselves, and everything we ask the guys to do, whether that's nutrition, conditioning, we obviously explain it as coaches for them, for their benefit, but in season when they don't really care about it. Whereas now when they're on their own and they don't know when they're back, they need to take more ownership on them. So like you said, they are more aware of the reasons why they need to do it, which is a lot easier for us. And going forward, they do ask a lot more questions, which is brilliant. And hopefully we can spark up more debates and they get more interested in actually doing it for themselves and not just because we tell them to do it.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that's still the case. We'll
Hopefully
find
it continues. Yeah.
out. And Richard, I had one for you. Now, in sports like tennis and cricket, spot betting, match fixing, it's been widely publicised. You know, I work in rugby and football and things like that, and we sort of ignore it and go, it doesn't really happen. How prevalent do you think this stuff is in other professional sports?
Yeah, that's a good question, Ian. It depends on the sport, of course. Team sports like football and rugby, for example, things like gambling are more of an issue, as we all know, and it's heavily publicised, as opposed to match fixing, because obviously it's harder to manipulate team sports. So things like fixing and things, particularly in a sport like tennis, where unless you're top 200 in the world, you don't really break even money-wise. So there's more temptation and risk. So each sport has their own different unique challenges to face with things like doping, fixing, and safeguarding, etc. That will come under integrity.
Okay, right. Thank you. I've got loads of questions, but we're going to have to stop because we're going to run out of time. Right, so we're now going to have a little break, and I'm going to say, rather than 20 past 1, if we are ready at 25 past 1 for the second half of our talk, so we can have a short comfort break and then try and get everything back on track for the second part of this. So see you all in about 10 minutes.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ian.
Thanks a lot. had a quick wee stop if that's what you needed, and we can get on with the second half of the presentation. Had a quick right, so wee stop. Just resume recording. Right. Now, a little bit of information. I got some information that the presentation from Paddy Hogben was a little bit quiet. So do remember you can re-look at it on YouTube. So if there is anything you didn't pick up, then hopefully you can through that system. Right. So our next speaker is Chris Long. So a little bit about Chris. Chris did an undergrad and postgrad degree at the University of Bedfordshire, and he liked it so much that he stayed, and he's now his PhD. So hopefully he'll be finishing that within the next few months. He's got a great deal of experience in terms of strength and conditioning across a range of sports, including rugby. He is where is it? Oh, sorry. He's part of the Northamptonshire Sports and Counties Active Partnership. So he's had quite an interesting COVID time working with Northamptonshire Council. But what he's going to be talking about today is his work linked with the Kettering Rugby Club, where he's the performance director. So I'm going to hand you over to Chris. So hopefully he can share screen and go from there.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can see the slides there. As Iain said, yeah, I'm Chris Long. I'm the performance director at Kettering Rugby Club, as well as being a PhD student at the university and various other roles. And I'm going to talk to you today about return to rugby at Kettering and how we've tried to use sort of guidance from professional setup in supporting the community game. So to start with, I'm sure most of you will have seen this graphic. This is the government's flowchart for risk assessment in return to play. The national governing bodies of all sports have had to go through all of the elements of their games to provide a full risk assessment for their sport, which has been approved by the Civil Service. Professor Keith Stokes from the Rugby Football Union has done this for rugby in England. And he's concluded that rugby union holds the highest transmission risk of all outdoor team sports. So with scrummaging, rucks, mauls, very limited ventilation, a lot of expired air, a lot of risk of transmission. Whilst individual match actions themselves are mostly in the medium risk category, the duration of those over the course of a match adds up to over 15 minutes and therefore tips them into increased risk. Now, Professor Stokes has put about a 13-minute YouTube video online about this, explaining the real specifics, the nitty-gritty. So if you are interested in how these conclusions have been come to, I'd encourage you to have a look at that. I won't go too much further into the process, but I'm going to talk more about sort of the impact on different levels of the sport. In terms of professional rugby, obviously when everything locked down, rugby was one of those things. The professional league, at least the Premiership, stopped in week 13 of 22 of league competition. No fans coming into the grounds, even in their return to play, so there's very little income. On average, an England international will bring in £4 million for the RFU, and that money filters down through into the professional and community games. So without that, with the Six Nations not having been finished, without the summer international tours and the big games at Twickenham, it's been a real struggle. Additional to that, a large amount of pay cuts have been seen in the playing squads. A lot of club staff have been placed on furlough, so that they've not been able to have the level of contact with players during the lockdown period that they may have wanted to. Positives, however, in the professional game are that actually a lot of the players have remained full-time, as has been mentioned in previous presentations. They've been able to actually have a rest. I'm sure the majority of rugby players won't be able to tell you the last time they had a 6-month rest. And a lot of them at the professional level have been able to take home some specialist training equipment and maintain a level of rugby specific fitness. When you compare that to what we've seen in the community game, the financial side is very difficult. I don't want to dress it up because things are very difficult in community rugby, but they're also very different and in a way better than the professional game. The government have made up to £10,000 per club available through Sports England grants, which we've been able to utilise. And as most community rugby clubs are either charities or community interest companies, we've been able to actively fundraise through this period. In addition, the members of staff at clubs are largely volunteers. So actually where they've been furloughed from their primary activity, they've been really glad of having the focus of rugby and the time to give to it in planning our return to play and a return to competition and doing the best for our players in the community games. So actually we've had more manpower in terms of both hours and in terms of individuals than we've ever had at previous points. Conversely, to the Premiership, which finished in week 13 of competition and is still being played out now, our leagues finished at week 20 back in March. So the league was ended there in similar situations as Tom was describing with MK. So we see those all as positives, but the negative is that we have no real control over players or staff. Some of the boys have come back in very interesting states or not come back at all. And rather being governed by the elite sport guidance the government have put out, we're governed by the RFU's rugby roadmap, which governs the community sport across the game. So that looks like this. We're currently at stage D of the rugby roadmap. Most sports have put out a similar graphic to this. It just sort of explains and demonstrates what different aspects of the sport are safe at what level of play. So this is freely available for you to download on the internet. Now, in terms of what this is looked at like at Kettering, what we've tried to do is take the positives of the professional game and the positives of the community game and meld those things together to sort of offset the negatives, particularly around our players. So with the amount of time and resource that we had, as soon as we were given permission to come back in small groups, we put 2 preliminary optional training blocks together. And those were our return to rugby and ready for rugby blocks. Now, our first block, the return to rugby, this was focused on getting them back to doing some form of exercise and getting their bodies ready for the unique demands of our sport. And most of the lads who had been training had been cycling, running, or doing body weight exercises, squats, burpees, those sorts of things at home, all linear anterior posterior movements. So we wanted to make sure that what we were doing with them involved a lot of absorbing force through the shoulders, jump landings, medial lateral movements, the sorts of things that they wouldn't have been doing in their day-to-day. So that when we came into that second block, they're ready for rugby and we started playing rugby activities or versions of the sport, their bodies were ready for it. The impact of returning to sport too quickly has been demonstrated in previous presentations, particularly in the Bundesliga, where we saw a very large and significant increase in muscular injury. So those 2 blocks were attended by 38 of our 50 registered players, which we thought was really, really good. We're very happy with that. In terms of what we took from the elite practice and what professional practices we used, we have all players registering online now. So we just use a simple Google sheet, completely free to access. The players register with their name, their club membership number and their phone number so that we can then provide a track and trace facility and we can plan appropriately space that we're going to be using and maintaining bubbles around the club. When the players arrive on site, they have their forehead checked by one of our medical team for temperature. They're asked about a standard questionnaire about risk factors and exposure. And if there are any risk factors, they're turned around, sent home and told to go and get a test. We found compliance with this has been really, really good. We've sent 3 players home over the 8 weeks. They've all been tested and they've all thankfully tested negative, but the system is working. The players have been split up into mini teams with an allocated member of staff. So particularly in that first phase where we're having to work in groups of 6, that's really important so that you have one member of staff working with a mini team and they take responsibility for that group throughout a training session, all the different facets within it, so that we're not breaching bubbles, we're remaining biosecure. So all of these professional practices have worked really well for us. Sanitisation breaks every 15 minutes. That's for the hands and for making sure the balls are disinfected. And where we're really fortunate is that with working to a 12-week pre-season, we're anticipating return to competition in mid-November. So we think we're going to get 12 weeks of pre-season, and we should be getting the lads back in. So they've already had 8 weeks, they're going to get 12 more. We should be getting the lads back ready for competition at the best position, physically, best physical state they've been in many, many years. Also, we've been able to provide them with individual and positional training plans, depending on what's appropriate. As an example, we had one lad who went into lockdown at 150 kgs, and he's come out at 118 as a result of some of the individual training we've been able to do with him, with the resources that we've had as a result of COVID. So in summary, the measures we've taken have been either in line with or above what the professional system have been able to do, primarily due to us being proactive in utilising the benefits of COVID, trying to see the best in the situation and working specifically to improve our individuals. Right, thank you very much for your time. If you've got any questions, then I'll take those through the chat or at the end of the session.
Right, thank you very much, Chris. Really interesting for me. I thought it's interesting when I've heard what other professional sports are doing. It shows that with not much money at a community level, you can actually put something together that puts quite a few sports to shame. I won't name and shame any of them, but yeah, some of the stories that have come out from some of the professional sports and what they aren't doing is quite frightening. So yeah, well done for that. Much appreciated. Right, we're going to quickly move on to our next speaker. So this is Jack Wells. Now, Jack also did an undergrad and postgrad qualification at the University of Bedfordshire, and he recently finished his PhD with us. So I think we're almost allowed to call him a doctor. I'm not sure, because he's just handed in his some amendments for his PhD. He's a lecturer in sports science for the Professional Golfers Association, and he's a consultant strength and conditioner with England Golf. And I think that is what Jack is going to mostly be concentrating on in his talk. So I'm going to pass you over to Jack. If you want to share screen, we'll go from there.
Okay, thanks very much, Ian. Can you hear me okay? Can I get a thumbs up if we're all right?
Yep, we can hear you.
Fantastic. Camera wise, are we on, or?
Yep, we can see that as well. Your camera's not on at the moment.
Say again, sorry?
Your camera's not on at the moment, but we can see your screen.
Right, okay, let me just see if I can get, not that you really want to see me, but okay.
Perfect.
All right. Okay, cool. All right, thanks very much, everyone. Ian, thanks very much. I always really enjoy talking at this conference. I think it's great to kind of share insights from people at university. Ian, I hope you weren't saying golf has been a bad sport for dealing and sorting out COVID stuff. So we'll speak about that afterwards. So yeah, as Ian said, my name's Jack Wells. Did my undergrad at Bedford, masters at Bedford, and then recently completed my PhD in biomechanics and strength and conditioning for golf. I'm officially not allowed to call myself a doctor just yet until the Research Graduate School ratify the changes, but the examiners called me doctor, so I'll take that for the time being. So yeah, I am the lead sports scientist for the Professional Golfers Association, and I'm a consulting strength and conditioning coach with England Golf. So I work with the England under-18s in my region, and basically looking to try and help them. Ultimately, the question I'm asking is, will this individual, could this individual possibly play for England? So I work with the age groups and trying to develop them. So what I'm going to talk about today is pretty much the England Golf S&C philosophy, but also how that's been affected by coronavirus. So our overarching philosophy is eat well, train well, rest well. And what we do within this is we will do some face-to-face coaching. So we'll be doing some work in the gym, getting them to move better, getting them to actually engage in resistance training, because as I'm sure you probably will appreciate, a lot of golfers don't actually believe in strength and conditioning and resistance training. It is getting a lot better, but there's still a lot of people that just think it is technique. So we actually try and get over those myths and try and engage our golfers within training. We do a lot of stuff around education as well, and it's great to see that the other speakers have talked a lot about that, because again, fundamentally, we see this as really important. And what the senior squads want is they want players coming through into their squads and actually saying or doing the right things. So, for example, if they've got some downtime between tournaments, they're not just on their phone or not doing much at all. They're actually resting and recovering properly. And what are they actually doing on the course? So one of the things we'll do is I'll actually go around on the course with players, which is great, because I can actually see how they interact on the course and actually have a look at what they've got in their bags as well. So we'll do almost like bag check to see what they've got with them. A lot of the time they'll unfortunately have Haribo, but we need to try and address that. So a lot of the stuff is around education as well. Now, the big problem that I had was I basically get 20 days consultancy with the players, and that was slashed to 17 right at the start of lockdown. So golf is a summer sport, and we were doing a lot of our S&C through the winter, so it's quite heavy there, and then the technical stuff starts to take over. But my days got slashed from 20 to 17. And the reason why this is even further a problem is I pretty much already delivered about 16. So essentially I had half a day with the boys and half a day with the girls. Now, me being me, I don't really stick to that. So I wanted just to carry on helping them throughout. So I definitely did go over time, but unfortunately I'm not going to get paid for that. So yeah, this is some of the stuff that I did and the general concerns that I had. So the first one, for any people that might already be bored or statisticians, this isn't a hierarchical or a stepwise regression. This is a general concern about their physical and technical regression. So we've been working quite hard on their physique and ability to produce force, and the golf coach manager have been working really hard on their technical skills. So like putting, chipping, driving. And we were concerned that actually during lockdown, they weren't going to be able to do much of that at all. So that was a real problem for us, or a real concern. Another concern looking to the future was, if you know much about golfers, you know they'll hit ball after ball after ball after ball, and they'll focus on refining their technique. So much so that if they play a round of golf and they play badly, the first thing they'll do is they'll go to the driving range and hit more balls. And that's a real issue, because for a shot with a driver, you get about 7,000 newtons of force going through the spine, which is the equivalent to 700 kilograms. So if you're hitting ball after ball after ball, after not doing much and being sat on the sofa or sat at home not doing much, that's a real issue. And we did sort of see a little bit of that with the low back injuries. The other aspect as well, which was a real big concern for me and a lot of the other S&C coaches, was the individual's mental health. And actually, coronavirus and lockdown was kind of really unprecedented, and it's been a bit of a shock to a lot of people. And to these individuals that were genuinely really excited about the season coming ahead and looking at their chances to try and play for England, for that to get completely wiped out was a real concern for us. So these are things we did. This is me with a Corona Cup. So we set challenges. So we would do like a nomination task on our online platform. So this is me just doing a ski sit against the wall, and how long could I hold it for? And then the players would put videos on of them doing it, and we'd see how long they do. The golf coach would do some stuff around sort of like golf skills. So again, this was quite fun, but also trying to keep them engaged with the program as well. So we did a lot of work in and around that. Now, the good thing about golf is we actually tried to focus on the opportunities as well, because some of the individuals have got gardens where they can do a little bit of light chipping. So actually, all we needed to do was mow up a little bit of lawn, and you could do some chipping. So you could really focus on other aspects, other parts of the skills. So we could actually try and focus on little areas like that, as opposed to their long game. Some of them did actually have hitting nets in the garden, so they could work on their longer clubs. But yeah, we tried to engage them from that point of view. From initially, we tried to engage them with some challenges. We also did a lot of online coaching sessions. So I found out quite quickly that the England players turned into university students, where they became quite nocturnal. So they wake up quite late and they go to sleep quite late. And so what I decided was to actually do some early morning gym sessions. So I was carry on working at the PGA, so I wasn't on furlough, but I'd get up quite early in the morning, get the players up, and we do an early morning gym session. But a lot of the stuff we actually did was, what could we do to utilize minimal equipment? So our sort of part of our philosophy with S&C in England Golf is actually, we've got to get force through these players, and we've got to get them, we want to get them to a point where they're actually lifting heavy, but lifting well. A lot of golf, unfortunately, is quite fluffy movement. So you'll see a lot of people that call themselves a golf personal trainer. They'll be doing a lot of random movements or swing weighted clubs, which actually is probably more problematic for the swing. Whereas actually we want to get the golfers lifting. So can they squat? Can they deadlift? Can they hinge? Can they lunge? Can they rotate? Can they brace? So for example, this sort of stuff on the right, we just with a towel, you can use an isometric deadlift. And as we know from what we saw from one of Iain's first slides, it was great to see from the almost the force velocity relationship. Actually, you're going to produce more force with an isometric contraction than you would do with a concentric contraction. So again, these are ways that we can put high force through the players with very minimal equipment. So we would look at trying to problem solve like that. The other stuff we did some online cooking classes. So we did these no-bake energy golf balls. So this is with the girls. So we got online. So you've got the coach there, myself in the middle, and then the manager. And we basically all came on and did these no-bake energy balls, which is brilliant because I could ensure there was no fires in the kitchen and I wouldn't have angry parents ringing me up. But also they can use these on the golf course as well. So when we map out a course, they've got a nutritional plan, and they might eat one of these at hole 4 and then another one at hole 12. So we develop their skills on how to actually cook for themselves or eat appropriately and prepare for the course. So we do a lot of stuff in and around that. I actually started something called Breakfast Club as well. So at times we'd get up on a Sunday morning and we would just, their pre-task was to get hold of some ingredients, and we would do a talk. We just make the breakfast together, and it'd be really quick to do. Often it didn't involve cooking. And then we literally just went around the room on the Zoom call and just had a chat about how everyone was feeling. So we've always got a really honest and open approach. So if someone's feeling pretty low, we chat to each other about it. And there's no such thing as like sort of a silly question, or if someone's feeling not too good, they can chat about it. So it was a kind of really open forum, and it was actually really good to see some of the players really open up in those talks. So we would do stuff around that in terms of looking after their mental health, but also again developing their skills to look after themselves if they were to hopefully make it on tour or as a player for England. We also use some of our time to develop infographics. So for the rest well, we developed like rest well menus. So they get points. So let's say for rest, so they get 15 points doing an active recovery, as opposed to 8 points for a foam roller session. So again, there was a lot of stuff in terms of education and infographics that went out, and also for when they go back, why things like hypertrophy are important for golf. So we used our time to try and develop resources for the players as well. The other thing that we actually developed, or we kind of worked on, was looking at our self-profiling. So we used to use power via MyJump. I'm quite fortunate, and I've got my own force plates, but a lot of the coaches just had their mobile phones, so they would. We tended to use power, but there are big problems with using power as a metric. Big problems is it's not cause and effect. So I've got golfers and athletes in general. If you do a vertical jump, some of them may be very powerful, but actually, if you look at their jump height, it's lower, and that's even when you average power out. So if you do their power divided by their body mass, so actually, power can be very misleading in that someone looks very powerful, but actually the output is incorrect, or it's not reflective of it. The other issue with the profiling users is very time consuming. So you would have to get a golfer to lay on the floor, you'd have to palpate their greater trochanter, you then have to take a tape measure down to their toes that were pointed, you'd then get them to squat to 90 degrees and you'd palpate the greater trochanter and measure the distance from the floor, and you'd have to put that in. And again, golfers aren't going to do this by themselves. So what we decided to do is we use something called Impulse, which is what I basically did a lot of my PhD on. And all you need for that is jump height and mass, and then you can use calculations. So if you've got a My Jump app, you can get jump height, and then you can work out takeoff velocity. And then if you do velocity times by mass is momentum, and impulse is directly proportional to momentum. And this is a really strong relationship with golfers' club head velocity. So we're now using this. So all golfers need is they need a mobile phone and a set of scales, and they just measure their jump height and they measure their mass. They send us the measurements, and then we're looking to track this throughout the season. So it's given us we've sort of really thought about how we profile and actually how we can make this better for our golfers. So in terms of the reflections, I actually generally I've really benefited from sort of pandemic in a way, in that it's allowed me to get a few things done at home. In terms of I've been able to actually focus on my PhD and spending less time in the car traveling to and from work. But actually, generally as a coach, it's forced my hand, and I would say these are forced opportunities. And some of the things that moving forwards, a lot of my sessions are going to be online, primarily because it's going to adhere with COVID rules and restrictions. The other advantage as well, it's trying to help the golfers to prepare for tour life. So you can actually do a heck of a lot of training with things that you can carry around with you. So, I mean, a TRX, resistance bands, mini bands, foam roller, you can do a lot of work. And actually, when one of the problems for a lot of touring professionals is when they go and play a course in Japan, or if they'll go and play a course in Kenya, they don't know what the facilities are going to be like. So actually, a lot of the time we get them to take stuff with them, and they know they can train. So actually, a lot of the stuff we're trying to do is getting them to prepare for tour life, but also to problem solve as well. A lot of the skills we've been working on for them to problem solve. It also saves the parents a lot of money, a lot of time and money. Some of my players travel over from Grimsby, and that's a really long drive. In fact, I'm going over to Woodall Spa tomorrow, which is Lincoln. We've got our selection day tomorrow, so I'm going to go and see some of the new athletes that are trialing. And it's a long drive, it's a long slog. So actually, some of the online sessions are probably going to save the parents a lot of time and a lot of money. And the other big reflection that has been a huge advantage is this self-profiling that we're going to utilise moving forwards. And the relationship that Impulse has with club head velocity is stronger than what Power has. And in terms of metrics, it directly relates kinetics to kinematics. So for us as a team, this has been a huge bonus. So they're my reflections from what we've done and how it's probably going, or how it's going to hopefully benefit our program moving forwards. Just want to say thanks very much for listening. I say this at every conference that I'm always very open to questions, and even take down my details. And I always say there's no such thing as a silly question, because I've probably asked it myself. So if there's anything that you're interested in or anything that I can help you out with, please do drop me an email, and I will absolutely do my very best to get back to you. And thanks ever so much.
Right, thanks a lot, Jack. That was great. Really interesting that you're almost using technology to build a team and a team ethos in an individual sport, which I found fascinating. Golf's a very individual sport, and suddenly you're having to use a sort of team ethos to try and help with mental health and things like that. So, yeah, interesting how that's going to continue. Right, we're going to move on to Mick Dwyer for our next talk. So, Mick, he runs the Ampthill Rugby Club. So he's the head of medicine and science for Ampthill, which he's done, I think, for the last 14 years. He's a graduate from the University of Luton, and also a graduate from the University of Wales. And he's actually a senior lecturer here at the University of Bedfordshire. So, if
Afternoon.
I can introduce you to Mick, and we'll go from there.
Yes, I'm just going to share my screen here, if that's all right, Jan. I can.
It might be at the top of the screen.
Technology and technology. Yeah, it's not actually showing me an option there, Ian.
Right, you should be a co-host, so you should be able to just hit share screen.
We're in.
Okay, thanks.
Ian, can you just confirm you got that first slide up there, yeah?
We've got the slide. Yeah, it's yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How's that? Is that it?
Perfect.
Okay, brilliant. So massive thank you, Ian, obviously to everyone at ISPAR for asking me to have a little talk today. And follows on quite nicely actually from where Chris was. Briefly introduced the pro and sort of the elite level and how that knocked on and had a follow on to things that Chris was obviously trying to implement down at Kettering. So just really quickly, just a really brief history of the journey of Amateur Rugby Club. It's a small Edwardian market town. Just over 8,000 in the population. We currently have 700 plus registered members, registered playing members, and the club was founded back in 1881. So we've had our first, although cut short, season in the championship, obviously dealing at the second level, the tier 2 of a 14 level system within the RFU. We got promoted back in the 18-19 season as champions, and well, I don't want to say the rest is history, but that obviously takes us to where we are now. I started with the club back in 2006. Again, Ian sort of alluded to the fact that I've been there now for 14 years. My LinkedIn job anniversary showed up, and it was quite a scary situation to think that I've been there for so long. But it's continuous service, and obviously when I started, there was very little there. They were heavily reliant on local physiotherapists, heavily reliant on GP access, and obviously the NHS with the accident and emergency. So some of the protocols and some of the procedures that I put in place way back has really put us in some good position to deal with this current situation that we're all battling with. So I thought it'd be interesting just to have a little overview of some of the areas we want to have a little chat about, and the focus, I think, the shock factor of working in our first year of Championship Rugby, professional league, coming up against teams who are well supported financially, and obviously their supporters, their fans, their crowds, way outnumber our quite modest Amptill. It's quite a rustic club, and unless you've actually been down there yourself, I don't think you can truly appreciate how rustic that is. So we'll talk a little bit about the initial decisions. Being a community club playing at elite level, there's certain areas that were really important to look at initially. None of the decisions were straight cut, so black and white, yes or no. Everything needed to be filtered down from above, from our committee. And being a community club, obviously we've got that hierarchy of decision making. Being head of science and medicine at the club, very autonomous over the last 14 years. I've been left to basically develop and mold I want to say a sort of a performance side, a medical side within the club, which has been really, really beneficial. So we're going to talk a little about the initial decision making from the board, right the way then to the differences between what Chris was talking about with the community rugby and the elite requirements. And it's been very difficult because we've had two sections of the club one side of the club, the community side, really keen to get back to being down the club, big social aspect. And we've got over 500 minion youth and academy players. So the focus and the care and the well-being of that proportion of the club was quite an important aspect, which I sort of took on board and really pushed forward with the level of communication and basically filtering down decisions from the top and making sure that the communication was clear. There was a lot of questions with relation to the differences in the guidelines coming down from the community to the community club, and then obviously to the elite level. And then I'll talk about some of the areas where we're trying to overcome. We're currently trying to get back to our training status, which is obviously at a stage C. But again, we'll talk about that as we move through. Slightly different within the testing. We're dealing with things such as what do we do with a positive test? What do we do with asymptomatic cases? Some of the challenges in the organisation, but also some opportunities which have definitely come out of this situation with regards to research, and also the possibility of providing our students with a real life situation, being obviously on placement with us at Anthill, something which I've offered over the last 14 years. So we've had a few Bedford students down with us over the years. So initial decision focus. Now, we know about the initial outbreak. We obviously, Tom, Friday the 13th, we had a game on Saturday the 14th. We played Cornish Pirates at home. In the week running up to that fixture, there were questions about the speed and the development of the situation and whether or not our game should go ahead. A number of other teams, Jersey, Nottingham, London Scottish, all reported positive COVID cases, and so their fixtures were ended pretty much before they got to that Saturday, before they got to that game day. So we really needed to think about what was going on. So the initial outbreak, following that fixture, so we had a fixture on the Saturday, as I said, against Cornish Pirates, which unfortunately we were beaten. But on the Monday the 16th, we made a decision to close the club. And this was sort of preemptive of the RFU decision, which came later in the evening. So although we had players attending and travelling to training, the decision was made as the situation escalated quite significantly over that sort of 48-hour period. So the club was closed. Now that had an impact on revenue, obviously, and it meant that all of our remaining players were furloughed. Now we have players who are on a professional basis. We've also got players who are working on tools, on full-time jobs, as well as trying to maintain this high level of competitive physical preparation, playing at the championship. So that was another area. We talked about player wellness, and also we also had this factor of players being furloughed, and the performance team were also being furloughed also. At that stage, it was very, very clear that we needed to get into this crisis management situation. Now, there's no SOP, there's no standard operating procedure for this situation. So that's very much what we were. We were in a crisis management. So we needed to really get communication out to our players. We needed to make sure that the physical, the psychological, nutritional well-being of these players was being maintained. And again, we had 8 games remaining, so these players were in a physical state where, they were in halfway through, sort of 2/3 way through the season. We had an excellent season, an excellent start. We beat Coventry at home. We had a really competitive game up against Newcastle. We took a bonus point from Newcastle, the only team in the league to do so, and a losing bonus point at that stage. And so it was really, really important that we needed to focus on those elements. Now, I talk about we quite a lot. Now, the medical team, the performance team, over the last 14 years pre-championship has been myself, with the utilisation of University of Bedfordshire students providing some of the supported roles within the club. And so, yeah, moving on then, psychological. We thought about the mindfulness, the monitoring, the nutrition. Especially getting into that mindset of eating during lockdown. How do we monitor and how do we provide advice whereas everybody was on furlough? We shouldn't be contacting these players. We didn't contact the players, so everything needs to be put into place before we actually were removed from the club or officially furloughed. So as I said, there was no standard operating procedure. We were in a crisis management situation. We were supported, and our guidelines and guidance and advice to the players of the club, not just at the elite level. So remember, we're still dealing with this community coach level, academy side, recreational weekend warriors, our extras, our third, fourth team. They all needed to be supported, although not at an elite level. They were being removed from their social system, their social network, physical activity also. So it was quite an important situation, as we said, to make sure this was in place. And again, the question was, we dealt with the query of when we're actually going to return. When is this going to happen? In what kind of state are our players going to be in when they return, both physical and obviously on a mindfulness, on the psychological side? The big question. And over the next few weeks, everything was an announcement. Now, I just wanted to have a little look at a specific aspect. So we talked about connectedness. We talked about how we maintain contact with our players. How did we ensure that we're making regular links and looking after the overall well-being of our players was obviously the main and paramount to make sure they can return in a decent way. So what did we look? We identified concerns initially. A lot of those concerns surrounded misinformation, which was being filtered down through social media. A lot of our players were obviously quite susceptible to that sort of false information, misinformation, which was being filtered down. How did we initially maintain that? We set up our virtual meetings. Now we talk about obviously tea and biscuits and whatever else. We set up, as a number of our presenters have stated today, tasks, quizzes, trying to maintain contact. But we also wanted to make sure that we were looking to reassure following this level of information or this misinformation about the risk of actually contracting COVID. What kind of risk are they in? What kind of risk are their family members in? Have they got key workers living at home? And then obviously moving forward through the situation, through the pandemic, we also had a lot of our players volunteering to help out in the local community with, pharmacy supplies, shopping. So that was another element of making sure that our players felt part of the community and making sure that our community understood that we're a community club, we've got elite level athletes, but we're all, again, in this sort of in together. Breaks from the environment was really, really important. Initially, as we all know, not being able to leave the house was very, very difficult for some. And that is where we try to integrate utilization of as much of the outdoor space as we can. And then again, your positive activities, your contact with the team, not just rugby related. There's a lot of sections within the team, which obviously they have wives and girlfriends who are friends. So there is a big social support network at the time across the club. Now, before I get to this sort of return to rugby requirement, I'll just set a little bit of a scene. So the RFU has stated December-January time 1920 that funding to the championship was being cut by up to 45%. Then they sort of backtracked slightly, and it was at 25% pre-COVID situation. That now has been increased again. So we're looking at a funding stream. Remember, we're a professional team working at a community, within a community club, and that funding has been possibly, still up in the air, up to 85%. So we've gone from having an influx of money, having international players. We had Tongans, we had South Africans, Argentinians, who were all obviously come across trying to re-sign contracts. So we had the particular time of the year where typically performance levels increase due to the fact that players want obviously to re-sign contracts or to increase their offer on their contract. So just to bear that in mind. So funding has been cut significantly. So that was pre-COVID, and that news hit us fairly hard. And then we obviously had this subsequent current situation which we have to deal with. So again, Chris alluded to sort of the return to rugby, and the community guidelines have been very much implemented at a different level in terms of A, B, C, D, E, and F. We are currently attempting to work at our elite level, at our championship side, to level C. The rest of the community club returned the second week of July. So following some various meetings with the medical team, with the coaching team, and obviously then onto the committee, being a community club, the decision was made to implement your social distance training at A, no sharing of equipment, progressing then onto B, and then onto C. The main concerns for myself and our clinical governance lead, Karen, I'll just introduce Karen. Karen Radley is our clinical governance lead. She is an ICU sister and has been working in Bedford ICU since well, beginning of the time. I don't really want to say, because I don't want to do a disservice, but yeah, she is very, very knowledgeable. So the decision was made as a whole to ensure that we had all of these elements of risk mitigation in place before we even opened the front gate of the club. So we are currently, as an elite side at the champion side, we're working towards this C. Ideally, we're working through D, E, and then F. Again, Chris talked about in his presentation about risk factors. Obviously, Stokes et al. 2020 has identified specific route of return, risk and challenges of return. And again, Simon Kemp and the rest of the heads of medical across the national government bodies have all got together to try and ensure that this progressive roadmap, this return to rugby, is in place to a sufficient level to ensure that we obviously mitigate this risk. Yeah. So that is the complexity and the challenge for myself at the club. We've got the community club, who in essence just want to get back down the club. Yeah, they want to have the social aspect, they want to have the playing aspect, the fitness, the physical activity, right the way from our senior, right the way down to our academy, our mini and youth. And I know myself, because my son plays at sort of under 8s, that it is a very well managed process, and sort of taking my head of medical hat off and observing some of these sessions, it is definitely an area which needs to be observed and maintained to ensure that we don't get complacent, that we ensure that we've got this stage process, because in essence there is not going to be any competitive rugby at our level until January. So anywhere out of the Premiership, and again we've sort of alluded to the fact that the Premiership have worked relatively closely again with the RFU, as with most of the level 2 clubs, to try and get back to this unrestricted play. And then the guidelines, again, with that elite level, we have to ensure that some of the additional aspects are in place. So if we think about where we currently are, so we're talking about an October return. We've got a league start January 2021. So it's a significant change in what we would have done with the physical preparation in terms of periodization. Again, if you remember, we had 8 games left. We had players who were in a physical, obviously in a positive physical position. And we also had players who were halfway through beginning rehabilitation plans. Manual therapy treatments were also within that progressional rehab plan that we put in place for some of these players. I had a player who was due to have a labral repair, anterior posterior labral repair shoulder. He was due to go in 2 weeks after our lockdown, or the announcement on March the 16th from the RFU. And then we also had an ACL return, a second ACL, unfortunately, for this particular player. So we had a lot of concerns to put into place. How are we going to maintain this contact with these furloughed players, with the team being furloughed, with the medical team and the performance team also in a position which is being furloughed? I'll also just backtrack ever so slightly. Players were coming to the end of their contract, so we had approximately 50% of the team was not being renewed in terms of their contracts. However, I still had work to be done with these players. So I still had an emphasis on their physical, their mental, and their nutritional. Although they were leaving us as players, the contract would run until June, July, and then obviously the focus from us was to ensure that these guys were in a good state to move on to a next club. We've got players who've gone to Jersey, London Scottish, and yeah, so that was a focus. So just backtrack, just digressed ever so slightly. So we've got a load of new players. We've got probably last year we had a squad of 46. This year that squad is going to be reduced down to approximately 30 to 36. So funding's being cut. Heavy restrictions on what we can do physically in terms of the training, the preparation. So these are all the challenges which have been presented to us and forced upon us in a very, very difficult situation, dealing with the community, dealing with the elite setup, the fine line, the balancing act. We're trying to deal with both of those, but also then trying to make sure that these new players coming in, we can integrate, we can get some team cohesion. We're looking at the dynamics obviously within the team, and you know, the way that we welcome those players is really, really important, especially a lot of those players will be in the same situation as our players leaving and moving on, and those players will be coming in fresh, looking for contracts, trying to be in the best physical condition that they can be in to ensure that they've got those contractual sort of buffers behind them, you know. So we've had more affluent clubs. The more affluent clubs have been back in training since June. So the likes of Ealing, London Scottish, obviously Saracens are due to play with us next year. They've been relegated. So there's another area that, you know, they're still playing. A lot of their players are still playing. So their physical status, their physical attributes, characteristics when they return will probably outweigh us ever so slightly in terms of our ability to get our guys to that overarching level. We're dealing probably with a 12-week pre-season, but in order to get to that, we need to ensure that a number of things are in place. All our players have to be risk assessed. Now that's away from our normal sample forms, away from our normal injury surveillance type information, which we use electronic systems, Rugby Squad Manager, for example. And also we do the CSX, which is the concussion management tool, which we use as an electronic tool to determine return to play. And so on top of all of those pieces of information, we must gain risk assessments. Risk assessments, we then look at obviously the screening of the athletes in terms of the MSK, some of the physical side of things. We're also then making sure that we've got appropriate PPE in place. And we also want to educate. So going back to some of the previous talkers, the speakers were talking about education. And it is an opportunity, as Iain mentioned, it is an opportunity to reinforce, to re-educate, to get good standards of practice in place. And then the final consideration for me is this injury risk. And obviously Paddy talked about the risk of hamstrings. We're talking about lower extremity injuries. 50% of all injuries occur in rugby union through the collision through the contact phase. We have problems with conditioning the body for that contact phase when it's not a COVID situation, when we can participate in full training sessions and appropriately structured pre-season and then into this first contact phase is going to be really, really important. So how do we ensure safety? We've talked about risk assessment and forming team bubbles. The logistics of travel, for instance, just a small thing, travel to and from the club. They must travel independently of each other unless they live within that team bubble, within that team house. Now, the guidance was within the car park of the club, it all needs to be socially distanced as we move through these stages. Okay, so as we move through sort of D, E, and F, far more contact is going to be permitted. And some of these more stringent physical distance, social distance aspects will obviously be reduced. So we're going to put on a number of evenings, not just for the senior guys, but we have got our GPs, our club doctors coming in, talking about a number of different aspects, both with our injury prevention, which will be my side of things, but they talk about some of the nutritional and also the UK anti-doping, which is also really, really important. So there's a number of education points which are being put into place as this return comes back. We then look at regular testing, both obviously thermal testing. We were in contact with some of the contractors for, again, testing our athletes, our swabbing, blood tests, whatever it might be moving forward, the most appropriate. But again, that is down to funding and again, appropriate and sufficient support from the RFU. And then finally, how do we ensure the safety and mitigation risk? We're looking at monitoring some of these post-activity physiological markers. We're looking at well-being. We monitor our PE, and we look at rest and heart rate, beat-to-beat differences, because when we move out of this, there is still an unknown aspect in terms of its effect on other organs, for example. Cardiac screening. We've got sufficient contacts which test already through a charity known as CRY, so it's cardiac risk in the young. All our players get ECG and full echoes through that process. So that is looked after, but there may be need for additional testing moving forward. So this is from Stokes. This is from Stokes et al. 2020, and the next two figures I've taken from this study in terms of the return to sport following prolonged removal from training. So we talk about what happens if we have got a player who is infected, confirmed infection, suspected infection, and we also need to take consideration into how we deal with players who may be asymptomatic, so have not demonstrated or presented with any of the signs or the symptoms, and how do we deal with that? And again, the question there is, what do we need to do in terms of isolation? Is it then a 7 to 10 day isolation? Okay. So again, we're looking at 7 to 10 days free from the onset, no sooner than 10 days, and then we can obviously look to reassess, use our GPs, using our medical team, and then we want this graduated return to play. Again, we're not too sure about the conditions such as myocarditis. We're talking about acute cardiopulmonary, cardiorespiratory issues. It's still unknown. And some of the Castelli 2020 produced a paper, some of the lessons learned from Lombardy in Italy, and some of the obviously information is being filtered down in terms of false positive from nasopharyngeal testing and the risk of other organs, etc. So quite an important non-sporting journal to take into account. It's going to take a significant length of time to determine if our athletes fall within each of these categories. So people who have developed other illnesses, people who have been infected, athletes who are suffering from anxiety and stress, young athletes, again, real important focus, an area which is has been neglected in the past, particularly within my club, moving from a community into the elite level. We do have a significant crossover of academy players through the structure of the apprenticeship level through into our second team, and then coming forward into our first team setup. So again, really, really important that we understand the risk to these individual groups with the return to collision sport. So some opportunities. So what opportunities have arisen? Definitely from my teaching side, but also then with the contact that I've had with my players, these virtual assessments, this telehealth process that we're currently working through. The development of transferable skills. So communication, we rely heavily on palpation, on touch within healthcare. So it is a very important area, not just for us as healthcare professionals dealing with elite sport, but also the understanding from the athlete side that things are going to change. You're not going to be spending an hour and a half in the treatment room on a Tuesday night because it's raining outside. You're not going to be able to utilize the facilities initially as we move through. As our club develops further, our revenue stream comes back in with the opening of the club, then things will change. But obviously the focus then, as we said previously, the work placement opportunities, giving our students a real life taste of an elite level sport or the elite level sport, and the difference between what we do with the community focus. So really important that we try and maintain that, or I'm going to try and maintain that as much as we can. And then research, yeah. You know, the effects of COVID on sub-elite rugby players, on community-based rugby players, their well-being, their overall effect on power and muscular endurance, and also the effect of deconditioning on injury rates, which is going to be one of my focuses moving forward. And I think that is everything I have to say. I've sort of rushed through that a little bit. I was very aware that I had the time limitation.
Thank you very much, Mick.
Hopefully that was all right, Ian. I sort of rushed through that a little bit. Hopefully everyone could understand.
Don't worry. Much appreciated. Really interesting for me that a professional club, and I know it's not just Ampthill, but there's professional clubs that are behind community clubs now.
Absolutely.
Just because of furloughing and contracts where we haven't been able to actually contact players legally.
Absolutely.
Very strange situation to be in.
Yeah, I mean, with that guidance as well, I mean, we were obviously really, really keen to maintain contact, but everything was filtered down from above. Being a community club, obviously, with wages being paid by the powers who be, we had to stick with that stringently. So a lot of the emphasis and a lot of the responsibility was straight away. So we had to put these things in place. We knew what was happening in terms of players were leaving us. Obviously, the furlough situation was a very, very difficult situation to deal with. But hopefully, we'll have some resemblance of a team returning to us now in a couple of weeks.
Well, hopefully so. Now, we were due our last speaker, Kevin Paxton, who's the head of the academy at Leicester City Football Club. But during Mick's talk, I was on the phone to him, and he's been called into an emergency meeting with the manager. So he sends his apologies, but our conference wasn't quite as important as talking to his boss in an emergency meeting literally now. What he's going to do is going to record his presentation, and then we can send it to you at a later date, so you won't miss anything that Kevin was talking about. Right. Well, that's pretty much going to be it. I'm just going to share screen quickly for a little bit of a thank you to everybody. So first thing is a big thank you to all the participants. I noticed on the chat that people were passing over questions, and I think all the questions got addressed by our speakers. They've all left their contact details, so if there are any questions that you didn't get answered, please send them through and we'll try and get those answered at a later date. One thing I would say is, if you found this interesting, if you're interested in studying with us at the University of Bedfordshire, if you're interested in doing some research at the University of Bedfordshire, please get in contact. You can use my email, ian.fletcher@beds.ac.uk, and I can pass you over to the right people to talk about any sort of research. Also, if you want to follow us on Twitter, that would be great. We want to have research that has impact and not just research for research's sake. So if you found this interesting, please spread that around on Twitter, because we'd love to get involved with as many of these participants as possible. And the last thing I really need to do is to say thank you to everybody that's been involved in the last 3 days of this conference. It's the biggest conference we've ever run, and we've done it online, which was a little bit stressful for quite a few of us. So a big thank you to all the people involved, but in particular, I'd like to thank Julia Freer, Angel Chater, Joe Hill, and Mike Newell, who have been instrumental in getting this set up and chairing sessions and things like that. So a big thank you to all of you. Hope you found it interesting. I'm going to leave this on for a little while longer. So if you do have any questions and want to put that through the chat system, then please feel free. Otherwise, yeah, everyone have a good weekend, and hopefully we'll see you at next year's conference live. Okay, big thank you to all of our speakers, because I know you're still hanging on. Really been great. Thanks so much for your help, and yeah, hope to see all of you in slightly different situation pretty soon.